It sat in the corner, untouched, unclaimed, and hiding something deadly. Welcome to Mystery Parlor. I am your host, Axon. Drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from. I'd love to know. Your thoughts make every mystery even more thrilling. Let's get into it. You wouldn't expect a fedora to start trouble in a place like Nero Wolfe's brownstone, not unless it was hiding a snake, a bomb, or a subpoena. But there it was on the hat rack in the entryway, sitting smugly between Wolfe's own wide-brimmed grey number and my tan felt job, as if it belonged. It didn't. Now, I don't claim to keep a perfect memory of every hat that's ever passed through our doors, but after you've worked with Nero Wolfe for as long as I have, you learn to clock intruders by how they upset the wallpaper. This one didn't belong to a delivery boy, a cop, or a client I'd seen before. And it had no tag, no initials, no name inside. Just a black band and a faint scent of pipe tobacco that didn't match Wolfe's custom blend by 5 zip codes. It was Thursday, beer bottle Thursday to be precise, and Fritz was in the kitchen prepping duck l'orange, which was optimistic since Wolfe hadn't confirmed his appetite. I'd just come back from a pointless 2-hour errand to the surrogate's court downtown, chasing a thread Wolfe had snipped off a week ago. When I walked in and saw that hat on the rack, I stopped cold. There were no visitors in the front room, no footsteps on the stairs, no note left with the umbrella stand. Just silence and that hat. I stood there long enough for Fritz to call out, "Mr. Goodwin, is everything all right?" "Depends," I said, still eyeing the hat like it might sprout legs. Did we pick up a new client while I was gone, or did someone break in just to hang their headwear? Fritz appeared at the kitchen door, wiping his hands on a towel. "No visitors that I've seen, and the bell hasn't rung all afternoon." I moved closer and gave the fedora a closer inspection. Mid-grade felt, nothing flashy. The kind you'd pick up in a rush at a corner shop if you lost your real one. It didn't belong to Saul, Fred, Ori, or Inspector Kramer. I'd have bet on it. I carried it into the office and placed it gently, almost ceremoniously, on Wolfe's desk. He was in his chair, as usual, behind a barricade of books and disdain. He looked up at me like I was interrupting a summit of great minds with an insult. "Archie, what is that?" "A hat. But not just any hat, sir. A hat with no owner. One that showed up without a head to wear it, a coat to match it, or a person to explain it." Wolfe narrowed his eyes. "And you infer that its presence is irregular?" "I'd say it's as irregular as Fritz playing the saxophone during dinner. Nobody saw it arrive. Nobody claimed it. It's not mine. It's not yours. And unless a ghost came looking for fashion advice, someone came in here unannounced." He sighed and looked at the hat as if it were an insect he couldn't classify. "Pfui. What have you done about it?" "Checked the locks. No signs of forced entry. Fritz didn't see or hear anyone. I've got half a mind to fingerprint it." Wolfe leaned back, his fingers meeting at his considerable belly. "That won't be necessary. If someone left it here, they meant for it to be found, or they intend to return." He paused. "Archie, notify Mr. Parker that we may require his photographic services, and call Saul, discreetly." That last part put a wrinkle in my brow. "No crime has been committed," I said. "No complaint made. Just a misplaced accessory." He nodded. "All the same, the presence of something unclaimed in my house is not a trifle. It is a message. I do not yet know its language." I tapped the brim of the hat. "You think someone's starting something?" "I think," Wolfe said, closing the book he hadn't been reading since I walked in, "that something has already begun." And with that, the great detective went back to staring at the hat like it owed him money. Wolfe didn't mention the hat again for the rest of the day, which in his language meant he was thinking about it. He sat in his chair as if nothing had changed, but he turned one fewer page than usual in his copy of Herbaceous Borders of Upper Burgundy. And when Fritz brought in the duck at 7 on the dot, Wolfe looked at it like it might be hiding another fedora beneath the crisped skin. At 9 the next morning, with the hat still occupying Wolfe's desk like an invited guest, the brownstone got its first knock of the day. I was at my desk pretending to do the month's expense report, which we both knew was as fictional as most alibis I hear in this line of work. I opened the door and found myself looking at a man who fit the phrase nervous banker a little too well. He was in his mid-50s with a graying part that looked ironed into place and a pair of round tortoiseshell glasses that he adjusted 3 times before he even opened his mouth. Pardon me, is this Mr. Wolfe's residence? It is, I said, and he's not in the habit of selling it door to door, if that's what you're here for. That got me a twitch of a smile. Just a twitch. My name is Albert Crane. I have an appointment. Well, not an official appointment. I was told I could come by at 10. Who told you that? He hesitated, but it wasn't reluctance. It was calculation. A man who knew what not to say, but was trying to figure out if honesty might serve him better. I'd rather explain it to Mr. Wolfe directly. That earned him a raised eyebrow, but I stepped back and let him in. He moved like he was afraid to touch anything. He paused just inside the hall, his eyes landing square on the hat. Is someone else here? Nope, I said. That's our mystery guest. Care to join it? I led him to the office. Wolfe was already seated, freshly groomed and dressed in the mustard-yellow robe that meant we weren't getting visitors he wanted to impress. Fritz had left a carafe of hot coffee on the sideboard, but Wolfe hadn't touched it. He didn't look up until I announced the guest. Mr. Crane, I said, meet Nero Wolfe, who values his time at roughly the cost of a small island nation. Mr. Crane says he doesn't have an appointment, but was told to drop in. Crane stepped forward with a sheepish bow of the head, not quite a nod. Mr. Wolfe, thank you for seeing me. I was told to speak with you about a situation, one that I'm now fairly sure is connected to the hat. That got Wolfe's attention. He lowered his eyes to the brim of the fedora, then lifted them back to Crane without moving a single muscle otherwise. Sit down, he said. Crane did. I took my usual perch at the red chair near the windows, notepad in hand, but blank for now. Wolfe gestured lightly with one finger toward the hat. You recognize it? I think so. I mean, I'm not entirely sure, but it looks very much like one owned by my colleague, Martin Ennis. He went missing 3 days ago. Wolfe didn't blink, but the room suddenly felt like it had one fewer layer of air. And how did you come to suspect he might have left his hat here? Crane pulled out a folded piece of paper from his coat and passed it over. I took it and handed it to Wolfe. The paper was standard stationery, the kind you find in corporate offices with no personality. The handwriting was tidy, deliberate. Wolfe read it silently. Then again. Finally, he handed it to me. The note read, "If anything happens, ask Nero Wolfe. He'll know what it means. M.E. no date, no address, just initials." I looked at Crane. You're telling us this Ennis guy went missing and the only clue he left behind was a cryptic note with Wolfe's name on it? Crane nodded. We found it in his desk drawer, locked. He hadn't been to work in 3 days and his phone was off. His wife assumed he was staying with friends, but he hadn't told anyone. Yesterday I went to check his office myself. I found the note and... He looked again at the hat. And the hat's gone. Wolfe's voice cut in like a scalpel. This was not reported to the police? Crane adjusted his glasses again. Number Martin valued discretion. He was involved in something sensitive. I don't even know what exactly. But I thought if he left this note, he must have come to you, or intended to. Wolfe leaned back. His fingertips met like the tips of a cathedral arch. Mr. Ennis is what to you? A colleague at Montrose and Bell. We're partners in the firm. Investment management. Wolfe grunted. That tells me nothing. I scribbled something on the notepad that looked like hedge fund yawn, but Wolfe ignored me. Do you suspect foul play? Crane looked down at his knees. I suspect something. Maybe blackmail. Maybe theft. But not murder. He's cautious, meticulous. The kind of man who doesn't leave anything to chance. And this... He gestured helplessly at the note. This isn't like him unless he was scared. I turned to Wolfe. Well, we've got a hat, a missing man, and a note written like we're hosting an escape room. Wolfe's eyes closed. Not from fatigue, but to filter noise. Mr. Crane, I presume you searched Mr. Ennis's home. Yes, with his wife's permission. No sign of him. His phone, his wallet, even his overnight bag. All gone, but not the note. Number that was hidden, not even labeled. Just there, in the drawer. Wolfe was quiet. Then, Archie, fetch the hat. I got it from the desk. Wolfe studied it as if hoping it would speak. Mr. Crane, he said slowly, I will require the following. First, a full profile of Mr. Ennis, his habits, enemies, investments, debts, vices. Second, a list of those who knew him well and might have known he planned to meet me. Third, his last known movements. Crane nodded eagerly. Yes, of course. Archie will come to your office this afternoon. You will provide him with access. Total Crane stood, relief softening his narrow shoulders. Anything you need. Thank you, Mr. Wolfe. Wolfe closed his eyes again. Don't thank me. Thank Mr. Ennis. He gave me a puzzle. I intend to solve it. After Crane left, I lingered at the door. Wolfe hadn't moved. The hat sat once more on his desk like a sentinel. You think he's dead? I asked. No, Wolfe murmured. Not yet. The note implies expectation. He believed someone would read it. Yeah, and that someone was you. Which means, Wolfe said, finally opening his eyes, that whether or not I ever met Mr. Ennis, he knew me, and he intended to be found. I folded my notebook. If he's not dead, then someone doesn't want him found. Precisely. So we must ask, who benefits from his absence, and, more pressing, who wants me involved? The hat sat between us in the hush. Outside, a breeze pressed faintly against the window panes, as if the city itself were listening in. By the time I got to Montrose and Bell that afternoon, the clouds over Midtown looked ready to file a grievance of their own. The office was on the 22nd floor of a building with a doorman too polite to ask questions and an elevator that creaked like it disapproved of my shoes. Crane had called ahead, so the receptionist, a woman with auburn hair, high cheekbones, and a poker face carved from Vermont marble, waved me in. Her nameplate said, Shelley Lind, and she didn't rise from her desk. You're Mr. Goodwin. That's right. He said you'd be carrying a notebook and an attitude. I smiled. Both come standard. She gestured toward a frosted glass door marked Private, Partners Only, and added, Mr. Crane's waiting in his office, straight down the hall, last door on the right. Much obliged, I said, and walked the length of carpet that had a suspicious amount of soundproofing. The whole place smelled of polish, air conditioning, and the kind of money that doesn't announce itself with perfume or cologne. Crane was behind his desk, a semicircle of mahogany cluttered with tidy folders and one untouched cup of coffee. He looked like he'd aged 5 years since this morning. Maybe it was the weight of bringing Wolfe into things. Maybe it was the weight of wondering whether his partner had skipped town or been pushed under a train. Mr. Goodwin, he said, standing but not offering a handshake. I appreciate you coming. I have to admit, this is my first time investigating a missing man via haberdashery, but I'm adaptable. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. I've pulled what I could. There are 5 people I believe knew Martin well enough to suspect where he might go in an emergency. I've also compiled a summary of his recent activities. We handle sensitive accounts. Some overseas investments, family trusts, a few, eccentric clients. Eccentrics are bread and butter. He slid the first folder over. This is Martin's wife, Eleanor. She didn't seem overly concerned when he didn't come home Tuesday night. She assumed he was with a client, but when he missed Wednesday and Thursday and didn't return her calls, she contacted me. And she didn't go to the police? Number, she believed, still believes. He just needed space. She said they'd argued. Nothing serious. But Martin wasn't the kind of man who left things messy. I opened the file. Eleanor Ennis, age 42, yoga instructor turned philanthropy consultant, 2 children from a previous marriage. Crane had even clipped in a photo, slim, brunette, with eyes that knew how to control a dinner party. Next was a man named Royce Delwyn, senior partner. He's been with the firm the longest, Crane said. Always distrusted Martin. He thought Martin was too ambitious. Said he asked too many questions about accounts that weren't his business. In this business, I said, that's practically a confession. Crane didn't smile. Then came Juliet Card, a junior analyst who had once, apparently, dated Martin. I flipped through her file. Smart, sharp resume, Columbia grad, 1 speeding ticket, and handwriting like a surgeon's. No mention of why the relationship ended, but if I'd learned anything about modern romances, it probably had something to do with either text messages or ambition, possibly both. The 4th folder was for a Mr. Irving Leeds, a client. Old family money, Crane explained. Very private. He and Martin met weekly, but I don't know what they discussed. It wasn't firm business. He insisted all records be kept separately. Martin handled it personally. Did you think that was strange? I thought it was profitable. I made a note to see Mr. Leeds in person. Last came Leslie Vaughan, the firm's in-house counsel. She was described as highly discreet and not fond of Martin's enthusiasm for transparency. I finished skimming. That's quite a circle. Anyone else? Crane hesitated. Martin had a tendency to ask questions about operations, about client portfolios. Lately, he'd been concerned about a particular offshore trust. He wouldn't say who it belonged to, just that the numbers didn't add up. And he brought that to you. Number not directly. I overheard him once on a call. He sounded wary, defensive. I closed the last folder. You know what I'm going to ask next. Was he embezzling? I raised my brows. Was he right? Crane ran a hand down his face. I don't know. If he found something, he didn't share it with me. Martin was careful. But if he thought someone in the firm was stealing or using client accounts improperly, he would have investigated it himself before going public. And then he wrote Wolfe's name down and vanished. Yes. I stood. I'd like to talk to all 5, starting with the ex-girlfriend and the lawyer, but I'll need someone to keep them from running out the back door. You think this is criminal? I gave him a look. Mr. Crane, the man left a cryptic message and disappeared. A hat doesn't walk into a house on its own. Either he's hiding from someone or someone's hiding him. I left with copies of the files, a list of upcoming appointments on Martin's calendar, and Shelley's narrowed eyes following me all the way to the elevator. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the plant rooms. I passed Fritz on the stairs, who informed me in a tone of grave resignation that Wolfe had refused the afternoon beer. That meant he was thinking hard. I waited in the office, organizing my notes. Wolfe entered at 5:02, dropped into his chair, and said nothing. Crane gave me 5 names, I said. All plausible suspects if you're into investment drama and lightly seasoned corporate treachery. He held up a finger. Number you will speak to Juliet Card first, then to Leslie Vaughan. The others can wait. I tilted my head. Why those 2? Because one of them knows where the hat came from, and the other knows where Mr. Ennis went. I blinked. And you deduced that... How? From the folders. From their omissions, Wolfe said. From what Mr. Crane didn't say. He closed his eyes. Juliet Card and Martin Ennis were involved. That's relevant. But she is not an emotional woman, which means she may have kept contact after their professional split. Possibly more contact than Crane knew. He opened his eyes, calm and grey as stone. As for Leslie Vaughan, an attorney who dislikes transparency but tolerates risk, she may not have taken kindly to Mr. Ennis questioning her work, especially if his questions threatened exposure. I scribbled that down. Oh, Wolfe added. And Archie, do find out whether Miss Card smokes a pipe. I looked up. Pipe. The hat. It smelled faintly of Balkan tobacco, an uncommon blend. I've now identified it as something imported from Sophia. Quite sharp. You think Juliet Card left the hat? I think she delivered it, Wolfe said, to ensure I'd pay attention. That stopped me. Wait, you think the hat was planted? As bait? He smiled. Of course. We were meant to find it, and now, Archie, we must be worth the trouble. Outside, the last light of day was fading, and the hat sat silently on the desk, still waiting, still unclaimed. The next morning, I suited up early and gave Fritz the usual pre-departure update, which was mostly just an excuse to grab a slice of the raisin bread he bakes when he's worried. Wolfe didn't appear for breakfast. I took that as both a blessing and a sign he was deep in whatever mental calculus the hat had provoked. Juliet Card worked out of a private office just off the main bullpen at Montrose and Bell. When I arrived, the reception staff looked at me the way zoo animals probably look at tourists, vaguely aware they're being watched, but too well fed to care. Juliet's door was open a crack, and she didn't look up as I knocked and stepped inside. She had the kind of posture you see in professional fencers, spine straight, chin slightly forward, as if conversation might be a sport that involved the occasional jab. She was dressed in a navy suit and crisp white blouse, her hair in a twist so tight it might have been contractual. Miss Card, I said. I was told someone from Mr. Wolfe's office would be stopping by. You're earlier than I expected. She didn't offer a handshake, which suited me fine. I tried to stay ahead of expectations, I said, settling into the chair across from her desk. Juliet Card, junior analyst, former Columbia chess champion, ex of Martin Ennis. Sound about right? People always bring up the chess. I find it useful. People who play chess for a living tend to think 5 moves ahead, and the good ones know when to sacrifice a knight. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Are you accusing me of something? Not yet, I said. I'm just talking about hats. That made her blink, just once, but I clocked it. His hat, I said. The one that turned up in our office with no note, no escort, and no explanation. Except maybe a perfume. Her gaze narrowed. You think I left it there? I think you're the only one in this circle of Ennis adjacents who has both the motive and the nerve. He trusted you, and he vanished after putting Wolfe's name in writing. That means he knew something was coming. She leaned back and crossed her arms. Martin was paranoid. Brilliant, but paranoid. He didn't believe in coincidences, or closed doors, or other people's discretion. What about yours? I have nothing to hide. Then why didn't you mention you saw him Monday night? Another blink. Longer this time. I smiled. Don't look so surprised. Wolfe was right. You're not sentimental, which means you'd still take a meeting with him if it was about something real, like money or fear. She didn't answer, which told me I was right. I waited. Finally, she said, he called me Sunday. Said he was on to something he didn't fully understand yet. He asked to meet at a bar near my apartment, quiet place, not far from the park. And did he explain what he meant? He said someone was watching him. He thought his computer had been accessed remotely, his calendar changed. He wasn't even sure if he was imagining it. He was jumpy. Did he mention Wolfe? She hesitated. Only in passing. He said, "If anything happens, Wolfe will know what to do." I nodded. "And the hat?" She exhaled slowly. "I found it in the bar's coat check later that night. I think he left it behind deliberately, like a breadcrumb. And yes, I dropped it off at Wolfe's place the next morning. I didn't want to be seen, but I figured if Martin trusted him, I should do what he'd have wanted." That sounded almost too neat, but she wasn't lying, at least not completely. There was something under the surface she hadn't decided whether to say. And since then, no word. His phone's dead. No charges on his cards. It's like he vanished. I stood. "If you remember anything else, like who might want him vanished, call me." She didn't rise. If Martin was right, and someone inside this firm was doing something illegal, then you're already talking to someone they'll want to shut up. That made it onto my notepad. Back at street level, I grabbed a cab and made for Leslie Vaughn's office downtown. Unlike the Montrose setup, Vaughn's space was tucked into an older building near Battery Park. Less glass, more grit. The door was unmarked, which told me she didn't want clients walking in off the street. She answered the door herself. A tall woman in her late 40s with sharp cheekbones and eyes that looked like they read tax codes for pleasure. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, standing aside to let me in. "You're punctual. That's both surprising and mildly suspicious." I get that a lot. Her office was sparse. A desk, 2 chairs, and a bookshelf filled with titles like Corporate Ethics and Liability Structures. I chose the chair with the least dust. "I'll be brief," I said. "Martin Ennis is missing. A note led us to Wolfe. A hat led us to Miss Card. Now I'm here because both of them, directly or indirectly, pointed toward you." Vaughn gave a tight smile. "How flattering. Usually I don't become a suspect until I've billed someone." "What was your relationship with Martin?" "Strictly professional. He was diligent, if occasionally irritating. A man who read every footnote. The type who asked questions even when he knew the answers." "Did he ask about the offshore accounts?" Her face didn't change, but something in her posture did. She went still. "Yes," she said after a beat. "He asked who oversaw the structure of the Anselm Trust. I told him it was beyond his pay grade." "Is that code for mind your own business?" "No, Mr. Goodwin. It's code for I'm not going to explain things I'm legally prohibited from disclosing." I scribbled a note just to annoy her. "Was there anything strange about his behavior the past week?" Martin often had the energy of a terrier in a library. But yes, he was jumpier than usual. More emails sent from his personal account, more absences. He stopped attending the Tuesday planning meetings, and he looked like he hadn't slept. "Did he say why?" "Number. But I assumed he'd discovered something he wasn't supposed to. Martin had a knack for that. Unfortunately, he also had a knack for dramatizing it." "Dramatizing how?" "Implication without evidence. Big statements without proof. Suggesting people were compromised but refusing to name names. That sort of thing." I stood. Sounds like a man who'd vanished dramatically, too. Vaughn didn't argue. As I left, she added, "If you find out what happened to him, I'd appreciate knowing. Not for sentimental reasons, just professional ones." I gave her a nod and let the door close behind me. On the way back uptown, I called Saul Panzer and told him to start digging into the Anselm Trust. If it was crooked, Saul would find the angle. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was in the dining room, halfway through a bowl of carrot and tarragon soup. He grunted when he saw me, which meant speak. "Juliet met with him Monday night," I said. He was scared. She left the hat deliberately. Vaughn admits he was sniffing around the Anselm Trust. No one admits to knowing where he is. Wolfe dabbed at his mouth with a napkin. "And your impression?" "Card's cautious, but not cold. She's hiding something, but I don't think she knows where he is. Von's a steel trap. She's either protecting someone or she is someone. Wolfe nodded. Then we proceed. To what? To bait. I blinked. Bait? He lifted a spoonful of soup. We let it be known that Mr. Ennis did leave something behind. Something specific. Something damning. I smiled. Ah, I said. The fake file maneuver. Wolfe inclined his head. Yes, it is time we see who tries to steal what doesn't exist. The hat remained on the desk in the office, still unclaimed, but now it had company, a story, a scent, and a secret worth killing for. Wolfe called it subtle trespass, that moment when the sanctity of one's home or person was breached not by a battering ram, but by a single misplaced object, a shadow that didn't belong, a crease in the rug that wasn't there yesterday. He said it was the most serious kind of offense because it meant someone wasn't just acting, they were watching. On Thursday evening, the brownstone got watched. We'd set the bait that morning. I called Shelley Lind at Montrose and Bell and delivered the story in a tone designed to carry just enough static to make it feel accidental. Listen, I said. We may have found something Martin left behind, something encrypted. Looks like files on a trust account, probably Anselm. Wolfe thinks it's important, so we're locking it down for now. Don't mention it to anyone, just in case. She didn't ask questions. She didn't even breathe funny. But I knew the message landed. Wolfe called Saul and asked him to prepare a dummy USB drive containing a tangle of meaningless numbers, timestamps, and account names that sounded rich and vaguely illegal. Fred Durkin was posted outside that night, making his usual rounds in a sedan with a broken radio antenna and enough potato chip bags on the floor to look like an honest mess. We weren't expecting a commando raid. If someone came looking, they'd come quiet. I stayed up late in my room reading the Maltese Falcon again. Around 2:17 a.m., the sound of glass shifting brought me to my feet faster than caffeine ever could. I crept down the hall in my socks. The office door was slightly ajar, just like I'd left it, but there was a breeze. I stepped in. The hat was still on Wolfe's desk, but the small drawer where I'd planted the USB drive, marked Emiad's B9 in Wolfe's unmistakable block script, was open, and the drive was gone. No broken window, no footsteps. Just that drawer, left half an inch ajar, the way someone does when they're in a hurry but too proud to admit it. I didn't wake Wolfe. Not yet. He doesn't appreciate being woken up before 7 unless the world's on fire, and even then only if the flames are licking the library. Instead, I called Saul. Whoever it was got it, I said. He sounded annoyingly alert. No signs of forced entry? Nope, no marks on the lock, no smudges on the glass. Clean job. Inside job? Possibly, but not our inside. Wolfe would never tolerate it, and Fritz has more integrity than the Vatican. I'll do my usual, Saul said. Call in a few favors, talk to some ears on the ground. Someone willing to steal from Wolfe usually brags about it to the wrong bartender. I hung up and sat in the office for a while, just me and the hat. It looked innocent, like it hadn't just seen the biggest sin you can commit in Wolfe's world. By 8:30, the kitchen smelled of chive eggs and burnt toast. Fritz's way of expressing outrage through overcrisping. Wolfe descended precisely at 9, groomed and ready. I gave him the full report while he buttered his cornbread. He didn't interrupt once. He just sipped his coffee slowly, like the warmth was fueling the gears behind his forehead. Finally, he said, then it has begun. What has? The panic. Could have fooled me. Whoever took the drive was careful. Yes, Wolfe said, dabbing his lips, and therefore afraid. He pushed back from the table and gestured toward the office. Come. We crossed the hall. The morning sun lit the room with a cold clarity that made the dust on Wolfe's desk look more personal than atmospheric. He sank into his chair with that same gravity he always had. like a king returning to his throne after a siege. The thief, Wolfe said, did not break in by force. They either had a key or they manipulated the lock, which takes skill. More importantly, he said, they knew where to look. There are over 20 drawers and cabinets in this room. They went directly to the one that held the drive, which means they were told. Precisely. Miss Lind is the only person you informed directly, and she seemed nonchalant. She may be innocent, Wolfe allowed, but her reaction was not neutral. You said she didn't ask questions. Not one. That is a question in itself. I opened my notepad and flipped to the interview notes. If you're thinking she's the conduit, that makes her either loyal to someone inside Montrose or someone outside who's bought her loyalty. Or, Wolfe added, someone who is both. We spent the next hour refining the suspects. Juliet Card had motive, but not timing. She wouldn't have risked returning to the brownstone after already involving us. Leslie Vaughan had the nerves and access, but she'd have used a proxy. Then there was Royce Delwyn, the senior partner who distrusted Martin Ennis. I hadn't met him yet. Wolfe noted that as a defect to be corrected immediately. I made an appointment with Delwyn for 11:30. Shelley Lind transferred me, and her voice didn't betray even the faintest trace of discomfort. Delwyn's office was the size of a Brooklyn studio apartment and had the aesthetic of a hunting lodge that took up investment banking on weekends. He wore a pinstripe suit and a watch the size of a coaster. "Mr. Goodwin," he said as I entered, "you're the man investigating the absence of our most imaginative analyst. You make him sound like a children's book author." Delwyn chuckled. Martin had his uses, but he lacked discretion. That's a funny thing to say about a man who's gone completely silent. "Exactly," Delwyn said. "If this were real, if there were a threat, he would have made noise." Called a journalist. Left breadcrumbs. This isn't a vanishing. It's a tantrum. I leaned forward. "And the Anselm Trust?" Delwyn's fingers tapped the wood of his desk like a piano key. "Out of your jurisdiction. But not out of Martin's curiosity." He was nosy, Delwyn said, suddenly sharper. "And naive. There are things you don't poke at if you want to keep your seat at the table." I stood. "That sounds like a warning." He shrugged. "Just perspective." Outside his office, Shelley was typing fast. I leaned casually over the counter. "Miss Lind," I said, "can I ask you a personal question?" She looked up. "I'd prefer you didn't." "That's fair. But here it is anyway. What would you do if someone asked you to betray a man like Nero Wolfe?" She paused. Not long. Just a sliver of thought before she said, "I'd ask how they plan to live afterward." Which wasn't a denial, but it wasn't an admission either. Back at the brownstone, I told Wolfe everything. He listened, quiet as a book that hadn't been opened yet. "Delwyn knows something," I said. He's smug about it, defensive. "And Shelley? She's cool, but not frozen. She could be the pipeline." "She was," Wolfe said, "and she isn't anymore." I frowned. "How do you figure?" "Because the bait was taken. That only happens once. After that, everyone's eyes widen." Wolfe tapped a finger on the armrest of his chair. "Now, we must prepare the second act. And this time, Archie, we will not merely observe the trespass. We shall expose it." I raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" "Invite them all," Wolfe said calmly. "Delwyn, Card, Vaughan, Crane, even Miss Lind if she'll come. Tell them we've decrypted the file. Tell them Mr. Ennis may have made a final recording. Something spoken, personal, incriminating." I stared. "You're making up a recording now?" "Yes," Wolfe said, "and then we shall see who panics out loud." The hat remained on the desk, a silent artifact of a man no one could find, and a truth no one wanted told. But now it had become something else too. It was the flame around which moths would gather, just close enough to burn, The invitations went out Friday morning. Wolfe dictated them with his usual economy of words and a tone so understated it practically whispered trap. I made the calls from my desk just outside the office, making sure each phrase hit the sweet spot between curiosity and concern. "We've decrypted the file," I told them one by one. "Mr. Wolfe would like you present this evening. It's in everyone's interest that the contents are clarified before any misunderstandings spread." No one refused. Even Delwyn, who'd probably rather dine with his own auditors, accepted with a grunt. Juliet Card said nothing for a long beat before replying, "I'll be there." Leslie Vaughan was short and smooth. She would come, and she didn't expect to be impressed. Shelley Lind needed more coaxing, but eventually agreed. Said she had questions of her own, which, coming from someone whose fingerprints were likely on our USB drawer, was about as subtle as a sledgehammer. The gathering was set for 7, sharp. That gave Fritz enough time to prepare hors d'oeuvres that Wolfe would never allow anyone to touch, and to double polish the glass tumblers no one would be offered. Wolfe didn't want comfort. He wanted friction. I spent the afternoon coordinating with Saul, who'd been busy digging into the Anselm Trust. He'd unearthed just enough to know it was real, dangerous, and wrapped in enough international anonymity to make it radioactive. The trust was laundering funds from at least 3 shell companies, Saul told me over the phone. One of them ties to a luxury import business in Sofia. That pipe tobacco Wolfe smelled? Same company. "That's not a coincidence," I said. "Number. And if Martin Ennis was close to exposing it, someone had a very good reason to shut him up, or make him disappear. Or make it look like he disappeared," I said. There was a pause. "You think he's alive?" "I think Wolfe thinks so, and he's rarely wrong." At 6:55, I stationed myself in the front hall. At 7:01, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Juliet Card, wearing a dark green dress and carrying the kind of posture that said she knew she was being watched and didn't mind it. Next came Crane, his glasses fogging slightly from the warm June air outside. Then Vaughan, exactly on time and visibly bored. Delwyn arrived 10 minutes late and didn't apologize. Shelley Lind came last, quiet, alert, and carrying an expensive-looking clutch that she clutched a little too tightly. I ushered them into the office, where Wolfe was already seated behind his desk, like a judge preparing to declare something unconstitutional. The hat was still there, unmoved, and now beside it sat a slim audio recorder with a red LED blinking like a heartbeat. "Good evening," Wolfe said after everyone had taken a seat. "Thank you for coming." No one spoke. Good. They were waiting. Wolfe let the silence stretch until it became its own kind of music. Mr. Ennis, before his disappearance, left a number of encrypted files. We now believe he also recorded a statement. Part explanation, part warning. We have not yet played it in full. That will happen now, in your presence. He gestured to me, and I pressed the play button. The voice that filled the room wasn't Martin Ennis, because Martin Ennis had not left any recording. What played instead was a carefully constructed fiction, a voice actor arranged by Saul, who delivered the script Wolfe had dictated with just the right tremble of anxiety and urgency. If you're hearing this, I've already been forced to run. I know what the Anselm Trust is, and I know who's behind it. You think I'm bluffing, but I left a copy of the documents with someone you wouldn't expect. And if anything happens to me, that copy will find its way to the authorities. Pause. Static. To Royce, don't pretend ignorance. You signed off on 3 of the transfers. Leslie, you drew up the structure. Shelley, I know who you're protecting. The voice faded. I turned it off. No one moved. Wolfe waited 2 full beats. Then, well, Delwyn was the first to react. He snorted. This is absurd. Manufactured. You claim the recording is fabricated? Wolfe asked politely. Yes, a crude attempt to implicate us all with vague accusations. Vague, Wolfe said. "Only to the innocent." That shut him up, at least for now. Juliet sat straight-backed, lips pursed. Shelley had gone a little pale. Crane blinked rapidly, clearly not expecting to hear his colleague's voice from beyond the veil. Vaughn, to her credit, seemed unfazed. "If Martin did record that, then we should contact the police immediately. You're harboring evidence, Mr. Wolfe." "No," Wolfe said evenly. "I'm cultivating truth." He turned to Shelley. "Miss Lind, would you care to tell us who instructed you to inform Mr. Delwyn about the fictitious file we planted?" That got a reaction. Delwyn turned toward her sharply. "What?" Shelley didn't look at him. She looked at Wolfe. "I didn't tell Mr. Delwyn," she said quietly. "I told someone else." "Who?" Wolfe asked. She swallowed. "Mr. Ennis, 2 days ago." The room tilted. Wolfe didn't move. "Explain." "He called me from a burner phone, said he couldn't risk coming in. Told me if anything happened, to watch for a message from Mr. Goodwin. When you called this morning, I recognized the cue. So I passed along the update. Not to the partners. Just to him." She nodded toward Crane. Crane sat still as stone. "I thought I was helping him," she said. "Helping Martin." Wolfe's face was unreadable. "Mr. Crane," he said slowly, "did you speak to Mr. Ennis after the file was stolen?" Crane blinked. "What file?" Wolfe gestured lazily to the drawer. "The one you stole last night." Juliet gasped softly. Delwyn rose slightly from his chair, then settled back when no one followed him. Crane's lips parted, but no sound came out. "I know," he said. "Yes," Wolfe said. "You stole it because you feared what was in it. Because Martin told you just enough to make you dangerous and not enough to make you loyal." Crane stood. "This is outrageous. You have no proof." "I have the drawer, the lack of damage, your access, and Shelley's misplaced trust." He turned to her. "Don't blame yourself. You were used." She looked like she might cry, but didn't. Wolfe turned his gaze back to Crane. "You believed Martin was bluffing, that the file was real and damning. You had to know if he'd left something else behind. And so you entered my house with my bait and triggered the very mechanism Martin hoped would expose you." Crane stood frozen. "Then he did something I didn't expect." He laughed. It was short, bitter, and tired. "I didn't kill him," he said. "I helped him disappear." Silence again. "He told me what he found. Said someone would come after him. He wanted time to build leverage, to go dark. I paid for the flight, the burner phone, everything." "Where is he now?" Wolfe asked. "I don't know," Crane said. "He promised to check in next week. That was the deal. I didn't know he was going to leave clues." Wolfe considered. "You broke into my office?" "Yes. To protect him? To protect myself. If he got caught or compromised, I needed to know how much he left behind." Wolfe leaned back. "You've committed a crime, but not the one I expected." Crane nodded. "Will you turn me in?" "No," Wolfe said. "You will tell Mr. Ennis when he calls that he is to come here, at once. And you will not enter my home again uninvited." Crane nodded again. Wolfe stood. That meant the evening was over. "One last thing," he said as the guests began to rise. "To whoever manages the Anselm Trust, I know you're listening. And I'm watching. I suggest you begin watching your own back instead." The room emptied slowly. Juliet lingered, then left with a whisper of thanks. Shelley didn't look at anyone. Delwyn exited with a grunt. Vaughn gave Wolfe a look of cold curiosity and said nothing. When the door finally clicked shut, Wolfe sighed. "The deception," he said, "was always layered." "Yeah," I said, "but the hat was honest." He nodded. "A warning in plain sight." I reached for the recorder. "Do we really want Ennis to come back?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "We owe him that much." Dinner was served late, and neither of us had much appetite. But the case, like the hat, had finally been claimed. The following afternoon, the sky over Manhattan looked like an overused chalkboard, gray, streaked, and tired of being erased. Inside the brownstone, the mood was slightly brighter, though not by much. Wolfe had spent the morning silent in the plant rooms. Fritz, in solidarity or protest, prepared lunch without his usual flourish. I picked at cold chicken and watched the clock. We were waiting. At 3:42 p.m., the phone rang. Wolfe was already back in his office chair. He glanced at me, and I picked up the receiver. Nero Wolfe's residence. A pause. Then a voice. Quiet. Male. Worn thin by distance and caution. This is Martin Ennis. I held the phone out toward Wolfe without a word. He took it with a nod and cradled it against his shoulder like he was talking to a rare orchid that might wilt from the wrong tone. "Mr. Ennis," he said, "you're overdue." "I know, but I wasn't sure who to trust. You were my contingency, my one clean option." "Your faith in me was inconvenient," Wolfe replied, "but not misplaced." There was a pause on the line. Then, "I need to know, was the file stolen?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "By your friend, Mr. Crane." Another pause. "Then he told you?" "Yes, he did." There was a long exhale on the other end. "Then I think it's time I stopped. Hiding!" Wolfe's voice sharpened. "If you're intercepted en route here, I will be irritated. Come directly. No detours. No announcements. No calls." "Understood." He hung up. Wolfe returned the receiver to its cradle and looked at me. "He will be here within the hour. Make the house ready." Which meant shut the blinds, lock the doors, prep the office, inform Fritz, and make sure nothing out of place remained, not even the hat. I lifted it from Wolfe's desk, paused, then set it in the hallway closet. The mystery of it had served its purpose. It no longer needed to be present. Ennis arrived at 4:38, wearing a cheap brown windbreaker, jeans that didn't fit him, and eyes that hadn't slept in days. He looked like a man who'd lost weight, trust, and a great deal of certainty about the world. He stepped inside and blinked at the hallway, as if he never thought he'd see it again. Wolfe didn't rise to greet him, naturally. I did. "Welcome back to the land of the visible," I said. "You missed a hell of a show." He smiled faintly. "I heard. Crane called this morning, told me you smoked them out." "Not all of them," I said, "but enough." I led him into the office. Wolfe gestured to the red chair. "Sit, Mr. Ennis. Speak plainly." Martin sank into the seat like it owed him something. "It started 6 weeks ago. I flagged an inconsistency in one of our offshore clients' statements. The numbers didn't add up, not just by dollars, but by design. Someone was disguising movement, layering funds across dummy structures." "The Anselm Trust?" Wolfe said. Ennis nodded. "At first I thought it was client side, some aristocrat laundering money, no surprise. But then I saw internal authorization stamps, codes used by Leslie Vaughn and Royce Delwyn. Crane helped me verify them. That's when I realized it wasn't a client manipulating the trust. It was us." Wolfe's voice was calm. "You brought this to Delwyn?" "I asked for a meeting. He brushed me off. Then someone accessed my work account. I got locked out of 2 databases I used daily. My calendar changed. My wife said someone called the house asking for me but hung up before speaking. And so you vanished. I needed leverage, something to make them hesitate. I left the note, the hat. I told Juliet just enough so she'd go to you." Wolfe sniffed. "She's loyal to you." "Yes," Ennis said simply. "I knew she'd find a way to get the message across. She didn't know where I went, only that I trusted you." "Why not go to the authorities?" Ennis looked down at his hands. "Because I wasn't sure they weren't compromised. When you're neck-deep in financial fraud that crosses borders, you start seeing threats in every smile. Wolfe, I was scared. Of course, Wolfe said softly. But you were also clever. That makes you valuable and therefore in danger. I've got everything, Ennis said. Documentation, timestamps, emails. Crane helped me encrypt and secure them on a server outside the country. But unless I make them public, now, I'll be a moving target for the rest of my life. Wolfe leaned back, fingers steepled. You will give me access to the files. Mr. Panzer will validate and forward them to an attorney I trust. Then you will stay here. Ennis blinked. Here? Yes. For 3 days. You will not leave. Not to stretch your legs. Not to call your wife. Not to look out the window. Fritz will feed you. Archie will guard you. If you move, I will not protect you. Understood, Ennis said, and he meant it. The next 72 hours passed in a careful rhythm. Wolfe informed the proper parties. Quietly. The files were analyzed, backed up, and placed in trusted hands. The Anselm Trust was revealed as a mechanism to channel dirty money through sovereign accounts and luxury export fronts, including one tied directly to Delwyn's brother-in-law's company. By Monday morning, the walls were closing in. Delwyn's office was raided. Leslie Vaughan was called in for questioning. Shelley Lind, with Wolfe's quiet intercession, was granted whistleblower protection. Crane. He stayed out of it, having already made his peace and taken his chances. He knew what he'd done, and what it had cost. On Monday night, Wolfe summoned the survivors. Only 3 came. Juliet sat close to the door, her hands folded. Shelley Lind brought her own pen and notepad, as if she might transcribe her own absolution. And Martin, freshly shaved and restored to something like composure, stood by the fireplace. Wolfe didn't stand, of course, but he did speak with more gravity than usual. This began with a trespass, he said. An unclaimed hat. A silent warning. From it unraveled a scheme of theft, cowardice, and, ultimately, conscience. You each played a part. Some noble, some not. Mr. Ennis risked much. Mr. Crane more than he intended. The others will face justice. He looked directly at Juliet. You were the first thread. That matters. To Shelley. You passed a message to the wrong man for the right reasons. That matters more. And then to Martin. You chose fear over pride. You lived, as that too has value. Ennis nodded, his voice steady. And now? Now, Wolfe said. You go home. Ennis exhaled. You sure? Wolfe glanced at me. Archie, I'll walk him out myself, I said, and if anyone follows, I'll make sure they forget why. Juliet left quietly after Martin. Shelley lingered. What happens to me? You resume your life, Wolfe said, and remember what you've seen here, not the scandal, not the crime, the conduct. She nodded and left. After the door closed, I looked at Wolfe. No final monologue. Wolfe lifted a brow. I have eaten 6 meals late, endured 3 days of sleeplessness, and tolerated one interruption after another. I have nothing poetic left. Not even a musing on justice. He considered. Justice, he said finally, is like a hat. It must be worn properly to be recognized, and never borrowed. I grinned. Then I'll file this one under well-fitted. Wolfe grunted. Dinner that night was baked trout with caper butter. Fritz had added a custard tart for dessert. I don't know if it was celebration or relief. The brownstone was quiet again. No more uninvited guests, no missing files. No fedora on the rack, only Wolfe in his chair. And peace, at least until the next trespass. Tuesday dawned with the scent of rosemary wafting from the kitchen and a rare hush resting over the brownstone. Wolfe, who had retired early the night before after Martin Ennis's departure, remained upstairs well past 9, emerging only when Fritz knocked, once, on the office door to announce breakfast. He was slower than usual descending the stairs, but not from age or fatigue. He moved like a man at the end of a chess game he'd won, albeit at the cost of using every piece on the board. I was at my desk with the morning paper, half reading, half waiting for Wolfe to grumble about someone's syntax, when he entered the office, settled into his chair and announced, "I am not to be disturbed until noon. I shall be contemplating the idiocy of haste." I didn't bite. Not yet. He folded his arms, let his eyes drift to the empty spot on his desk where the hat had once sat, and sighed, deep and low, the kind of sigh that happens when a man considers growing tomatoes in Siberia. I gave it a beat. "Something missing?" I asked. "No," he muttered. "Something properly removed." Fritz entered then with a breakfast tray, eggs soft-boiled to 3¼ minutes, toast at the precise shade of amber. Wolfe preferred, and a small dish of pickled mushrooms. Wolfe nodded approval but didn't thank him, which meant Fritz had nailed it. I waited until the last sip of coffee before bringing it up. "So," I said, "is it over?" He looked at me without blinking. "Of course not." I raised a brow. "But we found Ennis. We exposed the trust. We passed the files. Everyone's been shuffled off to their own little consequences. What's left?" Wolfe wiped his mouth delicately. "The part no one sees. The part that waits." "I assume this isn't about the trout bones in the compost?" He steepled his fingers. "It is about Shelley Lind." "Shelley?" I blinked. "She's free and clear. Even the authorities said she didn't act with intent." "She didn't," Wolfe agreed. "But she was willing to act without intent, and that is a condition far more dangerous." "You're worried she'll be used again?" "Number, I'm worried she won't realize she was used. There is a difference." I nodded slowly. "So what happens now?" "Now," Wolfe said, "we resume our routine. Until it is disturbed again." That was Wolfe's way of tying a bow on the whole affair without actually saying case closed. I'd learned long ago that when Wolfe stopped talking about a case, that was when it was most resolved. Still, I couldn't help feeling there was a sliver of something unresolved. Not a legal thread, not even a moral one. Just a whisper, a ghost of a hat. I left him to his orchids and made my rounds. First stop was Montrose and Bell, not to ask questions, just to observe. The reception area was quieter now. A temp manned the desk, a young woman who smiled like she didn't yet understand the bloodstains under the carpeting. Delwyn's office door was closed and would stay that way. Vaughn's nameplate had been removed. Juliet Card was still there, but she wasn't taking meetings. I left a note. Just 3 words. "You did well." Second stop was the corner cafe where Ennis had once met Juliet the night before he vanished. I ordered the same espresso he had, sat in the same booth, and tried to see what he'd seen that night. The barista recognized the order. "Your friend coming back?" she asked. "Eventually," I said, "but probably not for the coffee." After that, I returned to the brownstone, filed my report, and found Fritz in the kitchen preparing duck livers in brandy. Wolfe had instructed him to reaffirm the sanctity of the household. Fritz, in his way, agreed. By 4 p.m., the scent of shallots and butter had permeated every wall. At 5, the doorbell rang. I was halfway through the expense ledger when I answered it. It was Juliet Card. She didn't look like she had come to explain anything. She looked like someone who'd already said everything she meant to, and had one more thing she wasn't sure she should. I gestured her in. "Mr. Wolfe is in the office. Shall I announce you?" "No," she said. "This is for you." She handed me a small envelope. White, unsealed. My name on the front in her handwriting. I opened it as she stood quietly by the door. Inside was a photograph. Black and white. A snapshot from some years back. Clearly personal. Martin Ennis and Juliet, standing in front of what looked like an apartment balcony somewhere high up, laughing at something out of frame. They looked younger, less armored. She said, "He left it behind. I thought you'd understand why." Then she turned and left. I brought the photo into Wolfe. He didn't look up until I set it on the edge of his desk. He examined it. "I presume this is intended as sentiment," he said. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe it's just a reminder that for all your logic and control, sometimes it starts with something human. Like trust," he grunted. "You're becoming insufferable, Archie. Occupational hazard." He stared at the photo a moment longer, then pushed it back toward me with one finger. "Put it away. Somewhere it won't collect dust." And that was Wolfe's way of saying, "Keep it safe." We dined in silence that night. Duck livers, fresh, greens, and a claret Wolfe had been saving. I didn't ask for what occasion. After dinner, he read Montaigne. I read the paper. At exactly 9:03, Wolfe said, the hat was too ordinary. I looked up. What? Too common to be remembered, too anonymous to be claimed. It allowed itself to go unnoticed. That was its strength. Are we still talking about hats? Yes, Wolfe said. And no. And with that, he turned a page and disappeared behind the word. Outside, the city kept pulsing with its millions of private mysteries, its crowds and silences, its hatless men and women passing beneath street lamps. But inside the brownstone, everything had returned to its rightful place. The hat had done its work, and Wolfe, in his chair, remained, watching, waiting, and always, always ready, just in case someone left something behind. The case was technically over. The files were secured, the guilty parties ensnared, and Martin Innes was safely back under his wife's roof, wearing a new hat and a new sense of caution. But if you've worked with Nero Wolfe as long as I have, you know that cases like this don't settle neatly. They linger. They echo in corners. They stick to the baseboards long after the last suspect walks out the door. Wolfe hadn't spoken of the affair since our last dinner. That was his custom. When he closed a case, he did it like a man sliding a tray into a locked cabinet, cleanly, with 2 fingers and no ceremony. But the photograph Juliet had left me now lived, unofficially, in the 3rd drawer of my desk, folded between a copy of Wolfe's notes on Montenegro varietals and a particularly indelicate letter from a woman in Tulsa I once returned a stolen parrot to. Every time I saw it, I thought about what Wolfe had said, that the hat's anonymity had been its greatest strength. On Wednesday afternoon, 2 days after the office gathering, I found a chance to test that theory. It started with a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting company. Wolfe's calendar was empty. Fritz was in the basement fussing over a shipment of truffles, and I'd been halfway through realphabetizing the Rolodex. Don't ask why. I lost a bet with Saul. So, when the knock came, I opened the door without much fanfare. Standing on the stoop was a man I didn't recognize. Early 50s, ruddy complexion, wide shoulders squeezed into a summer-weight blazer that had lost the battle with humidity. He had the posture of someone trying very hard not to look like he belonged to a crime. "Yes?" I asked. He removed his hat, brown felt with a black band, not unlike another hat that had made a recent impression. "Good afternoon," he said. "I'm sorry to disturb you. I was told this is the residence of Mr. Nero Wolfe." "That's correct," I said. "He doesn't do walk-ins. If you're looking for a florist or a tailor, I can recommend both." The man didn't smile. "My name is Amon Blix. I think Mr. Wolfe may know of me, or at least of my brother-in-law." "His name is Royce Delwyn." That got my attention. "Come in," I said. He entered carefully, as if the house itself might refuse him. I led him to the office and gave Wolfe a heads-up before ushering Blix in. Wolfe eyed him with open distaste. "You are Delwyn's brother-in-law?" Yes, though I imagine that bond is a bit more fragile as of this week. Wolfe grunted. Blix sat without being asked. That wasn't common. Wolfe noticed, of course. I'm here, Blix said, because I need to know something, and I believe you're the only one who might answer. Wolfe raised a brow. My business, Blix said, was tied to the Anselm Trust. Not directly, but close enough that the raid cost me 3 contracts, 2 clients, and a federal audit. He leaned forward. I didn't know what Royce was doing, I swear that, but my company moved inventory, high-end imports, mostly above board. Mostly, Wolfe echoed. I've spent the past 2 days trying to piece together whether I was a pawn, a patsy, or a partner in something I never signed up for. I came here not to defend him, but to ask whether I've got a future. Wolfe was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Do you know what your brother-in-law called you, Mr. Blix? Blix blinked. What? He called you convenient. The man's lips parted, then closed again. Royce Delwyn used your company, Wolfe continued, because it was discreet, not transparent. That was your charm. You made questions harder to ask, and harder still to answer. You were the packaging, not the product. Blix stared at his hands. So I was a delivery boy. Precisely. He nodded slowly. Then it's not my hands they'll come for next. No, Wolfe said. But you'd be wise to wear gloves from now on. Blix stood. Thank you, I think. Wolfe turned to me. Mr. Goodwin will see you out. At the door, Blix paused. For what it's worth, I liked Martin. He asked real questions. That was his mistake. No, I said. That was his value. He gave me a look of quiet agreement and left. Wolfe called after me as I returned to the office. Archie. Yes? You will accompany Mr. Ennis this evening. I blinked. Come again? He is meeting with Juliet Card, a private matter, but I wish to know whether the meeting remains private. I grinned. You think someone else will come looking? No, Wolfe said, but someone always listens. At 8, I met Martin Ennis outside a quiet wine bar on the Upper East Side. He looked better, rested, dressed properly again, and holding a sense of himself like a man who had paid full price for peace and intended to keep the receipt. Juliet arrived shortly after. They embraced, not dramatically, but like people who had spent too long waiting for a moment to be safe. They didn't see me, tucked in a booth in the corner, sipping something overpriced and colorless. I kept one eye on them and one on the room. Nobody else paid attention. Not the bartender, not the couple near the window, not the woman pretending to read her Kindle, but clearly playing Candy Crush. But when Juliet leaned forward and placed something on the table, something small, rectangular, and wrapped in paper, I saw Martin's expression change. He didn't smile. He looked sad. He picked it up, unwrapped it slowly. I couldn't see what was inside, but I didn't need to. His lips moved. I watched him mouth 2 words. Thank you. After an hour, they parted ways. No kiss, no tears, just a gentle farewell. I slipped out behind them and reported to Wolfe from a payphone near the corner. He still insists on payphones when he doesn't want our line overheard. She gave him something, I said. I don't know what. I do, he replied. It was the hat. I blinked. You're serious? Yes, Wolfe said. She retrieved it, when you weren't looking, and returned it to its owner. A gesture. Of what? Of trust, Wolfe said. And closure. I hung up, smiling. When I returned to the brownstone, Fritz had already retired. Wolfe was still in his chair, rereading Plutarch with the intensity of a man daring ancient generals to try him. He looked up as I entered. Well? He asked. They said goodbye. Then the matter is finished. Will you miss the hat? Wolfe made a sound like a bear clearing its throat after a disagreeable winter. number, but I will remember it." He turned a page. "Some cases begin with a scream," he said. "This one began with silence. That is rarer and more potent. And the ending," he looked at me, "was earned." I nodded. "You know," I said, "it occurs to me you never got paid." "I was compensated," he said. "How?" He held up the book. "In peace, for now." He went back to his reading, and I, at last, went to bed, knowing that for once the only thing unclaimed in the house was the last slice of Fritz's apple tart. Some mysteries resolve with handcuffs, others with headlines. But this one ended with a hat returned to its rightful head, and a silence restored to a house that treasures it. The week following the resolution of the Ennis affair was, by brownstone standards, practically bucolic. Wolfe spent 3 uninterrupted mornings with his orchids and refused all client inquiries, which in practice meant I spent 3 days declining the guilty, the desperate, and the deluded, while keeping the pantry stocked and the accounts in line. Fritz baked more than usual, a habit he fell into when Wolfe was quiet for too long. And the air was thick with the scent of rosemary, cloves, and something ambitious involving black garlic. I caught Wolfe reading Livy in the office one afternoon with an expression that would have worried a younger man. I knew. Better, it meant he was content. For Wolfe, contentment looks a lot like annoyance smothered in pastry. On Thursday morning, while he polished off his soft-boiled eggs and I nursed a second cup of coffee, I decided to push my luck. "So," I said casually, "that's it, huh? 1 mystery hat, 1 missing man, 1 shattered trust fund, and a handful of well-dressed white-collar felons scattered to the winds. Everything wrapped up in a neat little bow." Wolfe paused, not in offense, but in consideration. "No," he said at last, "not a bow. An untangling." I raised an eyebrow. "That's not your usual metaphor." He pushed his plate aside, "because this wasn't my usual case." "You mean because it didn't begin with a corpse?" "Indeed, or a scream, or a visitor bearing desperate eyes and a fat retainer. This began with an absence, not of life, but of ownership." "The hat." "Yes," Wolfe said. "It was a deliberate absence, an empty declaration. Most crimes involve taking something. This began with leaving something behind." I jotted that down in the margin of my notebook. He noticed. "Don't immortalize it." I'm merely thinking aloud. "Do that more often," I said. "It cuts down on my guesswork." He scowled, which I took as permission to continue. "Ennis and Juliet haven't been in touch," I added. "Last I heard, he was back at work, but not at Montrose. He's consulting independently, and she's left the firm entirely." Wolfe nodded. "Expected." "You're not going to ask me to follow them?" "No." That was significant. Wolfe didn't like unresolved variables, but in this case, he judged them not as potential threats, but as spent forces. People who'd made choices and would live with the results. "Shelley Lind," I said. "She's cooperating with the inquiry." "She was used," Wolfe replied, "but not ruined. That distinction is important." "You think she learned something?" He gave me a sharp look. "Of course. She learned that silence can be a weapon, used against you as easily as by you. It's a lesson people rarely forget once they've learned it honestly." I scratched a line in my notes. "What about Crane?" "Ah." Wolfe leaned back, lacing his fingers across his stomach. "He is a peculiar case. A man who did the wrong thing for what he believed were the right reasons. He was never malicious, only frightened. That makes him dangerous only when desperate. And now he is no longer desperate." "You think he regrets it?" "I think he will. Often." I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the block looked normal. A boy on a scooter zipped past the iron fence. The mailman was coming up the steps. The sun hit the sidewalk in patches, as if the world was slowly deciding whether to shine or not. "I'll say one thing," I said. "You never flinched. Not even when the bait was taken. Wolfe snorted. I flinched, internally. That must have been exhausting. I managed. There was a pause then, and it hung just long enough for Wolfe to break it himself. You did well, Archie. I turned. He never said it casually. When Wolfe praised, it wasn't for morale. It was for fact. That made it better. Thank you, sir. He glanced at the clock. Have Fritz prepare the duck confit, with tarragon and lemon, and tell him to open the second bottle of the Domaine Chandon, the real one, not the one he hides behind the grappa. Celebrating? Restoring balance. I went to the kitchen with the message. Fritz gave me a pleased nod and a rare smile. He didn't ask why, he already knew. That evening, the three of us dined in the front room, a rarity reserved for occasions Wolfe deemed structurally important. He did not elaborate. He didn't need to. The wine flowed, the duck was perfect, and the quiet was not awkward but earned. After dessert, pear tart tatin with crème fraîche, Wolfe lingered at the table, swirling the last inch of wine in his glass. I do not approve of mysteries, he said suddenly. At least not the ones that begin without being announced. I leaned back. And yet, you solved it. Because it required attention, not action. That is the only kind I'm suited for. You ever wonder, I said, what would have happened if we'd ignored the hat? No, Wolfe said. Because we didn't. And that is the only part that matters. The phone didn't ring. No doorbell broke the silence. No urgent knock, no dropped package, no coded telegram. For once, the brownstone was untouched. I didn't know how long it would last. But for that night, we had peace. And in Wolfe's house, that was a rarer prize than justice. After we'd cleared the plates and Fritz had disappeared into his own corners of the house, Wolfe remained seated. The office door was open. The light was low. I passed him on my way to bed. You ever figure out what the hat really meant? I asked. He looked up from his book. Yes, he said. It meant that someone still believes in signs, that sometimes the absence of a name is louder than a confession. And the message? He closed the book. That even in a world of data, passwords and digital ghosts, the right object, left in the right place, can still change everything. I didn't have a comeback for that, so I nodded and headed up the stairs. Behind me, the brownstone was still again. The world spun on, but within those walls, the silence was whole, and this time there was nothing left behind. The story, as far as the newspapers were concerned, ended a week later when the Department of Justice released a terse statement confirming that Montrose and Bell had been fined for regulatory irregularities and that a broader investigation into associated shell corporations was ongoing. Names were not listed. Connections were not detailed. The public was offered a chew toy and asked to move along. Inside the brownstone, the story ended not with a bang or a sigh, but with a visitor. It was early evening, a Tuesday. Fritz was preparing lentils and smoked sausage. Wolfe was reading a monograph on 19th century Bulgarian horticulture. I was reorganizing case files in a fit of optimism. That was when the doorbell rang. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. I went to answer it. Standing outside was Juliet Card. Her coat was long and dark, her hair pulled back, and her expression unreadable. She wasn't carrying a purse, just a thin envelope sealed with a red sticker. I stepped aside and let her in. She didn't ask for Wolfe. She didn't need to. She walked straight to the office, as though she'd rehearsed it. Wolfe looked up as she entered. "Miss Card," he said. "Unexpected." She nodded. That's how most things start, isn't it? She sat, uninvited but without presumption. Then she placed the envelope on the desk. "This was left in Martin's private cloud folder," she said, "hidden behind financial spreadsheets. He forgot to delete it when he transferred control of the files to your people." Wolfe didn't touch it. "Go on," he said. Juliet folded her hands. "It's a draft of an email, never sent, addressed to me, but he never finished it. It's dated the night before he disappeared. In it, he outlines the final clue, the reason he chose you." That piqued Wolfe's interest, though he gave no outward sign. "He says," she continued, "that he didn't trust the institutions, didn't trust his firm, didn't trust the law. But he remembered something I told him, something I said once in passing." Wolfe said nothing. Juliet smiled faintly. "I told him, if you ever really needed to make something known, really known and understood, you didn't send it to a lawyer, or a politician, or the press. You left it in Nero Wolfe's office, in plain sight." Now Wolfe did speak. "And the hat? It belonged to his father. Martin kept it in a drawer, said he hated it, said it represented everything he didn't want to be. But when it was time to run, he left it behind anyway. Because he knew you'd notice it, and he knew I would be the one to explain it." Wolfe considered that. Then he gestured toward the envelope. "Archie." I took it, opened it, and scanned the first lines of the unsent message. "If something happens to me, it will not be because I was wrong. It will be because I asked the right question to the wrong person. I've chosen Wolfe not because he cares, but because he'll understand. There is comfort in logic. Justice too, perhaps. And if not justice, then at least recognition." I looked up. Juliet rose to go. "That's all," she said. "No more puzzles. He just wanted to be understood." She left. The door closed softly behind her. Wolfe sat motionless for a long time. Then he said, "It was not a case, Archie. Not in the usual sense." "No," I agreed. "More like a message that needed deciphering." He nodded. "A man left a symbol of absence to prove his presence. That's rare and rather elegant." I took the letter, folded it carefully, and filed it. Not under Ennis, Martin, and not under card, Juliet. I placed it with the hat itself, now boxed and labeled and stored on the highest shelf in the back cabinet. Wolfe would never wear it, of course, but he wouldn't forget it either. That night, over lentils and quiet satisfaction, Wolfe finally offered his final verdict. "A case does not require a body to leave a mark," he said. "Only intent, the clarity of purpose. A man who leaves nothing behind but an object and a name still leaves enough." I tapped my fork against the edge of my plate. "So," I said, "the lesson?" Wolfe sipped his wine. "The lesson, Archie, is that deduction begins not with what is stolen, but with what is left untouched." He reached for a second helping. Outside, New York moved as always, fast, forgetful, and forever in flux. But inside the brownstone, everything had returned to stillness. No new cases, no calls, no unclaimed hats, just the sound of silence, earned, measured, and, for now, complete. "You said, write the final section," ChatGPT said. "Final section, the quiet claim." 3 weeks had passed since the night we played the recording that never existed and exposed a crime too intricate for headlines. In that time, the brownstone had returned to its sacred quiet. No more nervous visitors, no more planted hats, no more unexpected trespasses. And yet the silence hadn't quite settled. It lingered, charged, like air just before a storm. I wasn't the only one who noticed. Fritz had taken to baking at odd hours again. Wolfe spent longer than usual in the plant rooms, and I found myself more than once standing in the front hall looking at the space on the rack where the mystery hat had sat. It was gone, of course, returned to Martin Ennis by Juliet, a gesture that made a point without speaking a word. But its absence had become as loud as its presence once was. That was the trick of this case. It taught you to listen to what wasn't said, to look at what had been quietly, deliberately left behind. And then, late on a Friday afternoon, the The story came full circle. The mail arrived, a little heavier than usual. Fritz handed it to me with a puzzled frown. Among the usual bills and catalogues was a slim package, wrapped in brown paper, postmarked from a private box in Vermont. No return name, just my own, written in careful black ink. I opened it cautiously in the office, under Wolfe's watchful eye. Inside was a hat. Not the original, not Martin's father's. This one was new. High-quality felt, impeccably shaped. The band was dark blue, almost black. And tucked inside, beneath the sweatband, was a card. No signature, just 5 words in the same neat handwriting. Some messages need know. Sender, I held it out to Wolfe. He didn't touch it. He simply studied it for a long moment, then nodded once. "A gift," he said. "From Martin?" "From the event, from its resolution. A gesture meant not for gratitude, but for understanding." He glanced toward the coat rack, then back at the hat. "Archie, place it on the stand." I did, and there it sat, silently, taking the spot once held by the hat that started it all. "Interesting," Wolfe murmured. "The mystery ends not when it is solved, but when it is acknowledged." "And what does this one acknowledge?" I asked. Wolfe closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. That the case was not about fraud or files. Not even about trust. It was about silence, and how silence, handled with care, becomes a kind of justice. He reached for his beer. "People think noise is what makes truth come out. But the truth often arrives dressed in silence, and sometimes," he said, gesturing at the new hat, "it leaves behind something to remind you it was here." I looked at the hat, then back at him. "So what do we call this one?" Wolfe considered. "The hat that was claimed." He took a sip, and not by a person, but by an idea. The office was still. The light shifted on the walls. Outside, New York thundered on, but inside the case of the hat, silent, precise, deliberate, was complete. And finally, the brownstone was whole again. Stone 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 was whole again.